We recognize that CVUUS gathers on the land of the Western Abenaki people. We respect the Abenaki people's spiritual relationship to the land and the waters of the Champlain Valley, and we hope to learn from them how we can live together in peace and justice. Good morning. And welcome to CVUUS. The Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society exists to spiritually nourish, challenge, and sustain people of all ages and circumstances so that they might lead lives of meaning, integrity, and service. My name is Becky Strum. I'm a member of this congregation and the worship team, and today I serve as worship associate for our settled minister, the Reverend Barnaby Feeder. So here we are, smack in the middle of January. I had a dear friend who loved the natural light of January. In my family, we have 2 January birthdays, my brother and my sister. And each day when I look at the weather app on my phone, I notice that the sun rises a little earlier and sets a little later. Being a relative newcomer to Vermont who does not love the cold, these are some things that help me to feel better about January. So, if this is your first time with us, please sign the book in the foyer so that we can get to know you a little better and you can receive our email blast. And everyone, please join us after the service downstairs in the Ann Ross Fellowship Room for our social hour, where this morning we will have treats for everyone. Gluten-full, gluten-free, dairy-full, dairy-free, sugar-free, vegan, compliments of your worship team. If you need hearing assistance, please check in the back with Rich for some excellent headsets. Each week, there are many ways, in addition to Sunday services, to become involved and connect. And you can learn about all of these ways in our weekly email blast, the monthly newsletter, and in our order of service each Sunday. Today, after the service, we'll be having a congregational conversation on the signage in the Spirit in Nature Trail in Ripton. So this is a trail for those of you who haven't walked it. I actually walked it many years ago before my husband and I even moved here. But CVUUS were got it going in the beginning, and there are inspirational messages and words from many different religions in the trail. So there's going to be, we have an opportunity to update what we've said. And today, after the service, grab a beverage and some goodies and meet in the Blue Room around 11:30 if you want to help. No, it's going to be changed. It's going to be up here. Okay, meet up here. So, as always, there were many people involved in putting this service together. Special thanks to our choir, our incredible house band. I always love to be here with the house band. Jess Daniel from our flower co-op, which I've learned has renamed itself the Flower Buds. I love that. So Jess has provided a beautiful seasonal decorations. Our videocaster today, Richard Hopkins, and everyone, I see Jordan on the camera, everyone who stepped up to help with tech, ushering, greeting, safety, and our social hour. So now we have our gathering song. Oh. We have to wait a minute for Test, test, test. Our call to worship today is adapted from A Network of Mutuality by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. We haven't done a responsive reading in a long time. I love responsive readings. So we have this in your order of service. I will wait till it's up on the screen as well. I know we have it there, but it is here in the order of service. I will take you take the italicized lines, and I will take the non-italicized lines, and I don't know, everybody can see it here. Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted.
Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, retaliation.
The foundation of such a method is love.
Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war.
One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal.
Thus do we gather today to pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
To hew out of the mountains of despair a stone of hope.
Amen, yes. And now Reverend Barnaby will light the chalice. Please join with me as we light our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. We light this chalice, symbol of our faith alive in this world, naming our vision of collective liberation and daring to remember each other into beloved community.
Good morning. Good morning. Beloved community is something that I am guessing we're going to hear more about this morning. Good guess, says Barnaby. It doesn't have just one definition, really. If you're looking for just a clean, here's the sentence that describes it, it's a little like Unitarian Universalism, in that the frustration of it is you're not going to find one sentence. The beauty of it is you're not going to find one sentence. I chose this book because I think it lifts up a lot of things that to me are beloved community. And it is audience participation if you want it. So you will see that once I get started, each page spread will start with the phrase, "You can be a king." And it said you can be a king, not because of the gendered king who might be male, although maybe not, but because it's like you can be a Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. For those who didn't pick that up. So the part that you can do if you want to is I'll say you can, and everyone will say be a king. So let's give it a try. And again, you're invited. You don't need to do this if this does not feed you. You can be a king. There you go. If it makes you feel better to say you can be something else, even though you're thinking about what's in this book, then go for it. All right, so the book is called Be a King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Dream and You. And there's a quote at the beginning. I'm going to read just a little bit of it, not the whole thing. Everybody, from Martin Luther King, sorry. Everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics in physics. That's good. I picked a college where I did not have to take a science class. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. You can be a king, marvel at creation, keep the faith of your ancestors. You can be a king, know that bigotry hurts, remember how you felt when treated unfairly. You can be a king, admit that you've done wrong, just say, I'm sorry, and mean it. You can be a king. Know that dividing walls should come down. You have glimpsed the other side. You can be a king. Break the chains of ignorance. Learn as much as you can. You can be a king. Stand for peace. Band together against bullies. You can be a king. Sing a song of freedom. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. You can be a king. Stamp out hatred. Put your foot down and walk tall. You can be a king. Answer your critics. Believe in your cause and state it plainly. And for the non-readers, they're painting equal rights for all. You can be a king. Have a dream. Make yours great enough to grow into. You can be a king. Make the world take notice. Do your very best at whatever you do. You can be a king. Beat the drum for justice. March to your own conscience. That means what you know or think is right. You can be a king. Lift up the less fortunate. Be the king or queen or other ruler of help. You can be a king. Set your sights on the mountaintop. Climb a little higher every day. Amen. Amen. So, what I'll leave you with as we go into the heart of the service and into the week and into RE is intentionally this week trying to look for a moment where you can be a king or a queen or something else or I'm trying to look for some word that's not so. I mean, you can be Martin Luther King. That's what I'll say, right? Look especially for something that you feel uncomfortable doing. That's what I'll send you. If you have a moment where you're like, oh, maybe I'll, or I should, or I could, or they need, and then you're like, like if you can, especially if the reason you're not doing it is just that it's like kind of uncomfortable or scary, I encourage you to push yourself and go ahead and try it and see how that feels. So, my dear younger ones, it is time to go to RE. We're going to sing the kids out with a different song. it.
301.
301.
301. Thank you. I don't know if everybody has a Kindle or not. There we go. So touch the earth, reach the sky. And as always, if you don't know this, great, sing along anyway.
For those of you who know Ashley, I'm obviously not Ashley. Ashley's at home sick this morning and following good procedure of not coming here and infecting anybody else. But she sent me this material that she prepared to introduce the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, with whom we are sharing our offering today. It's a faith-based community that is run by and focused on serving Black UUs. And this work includes giving Black UUs their own platform for mutually beneficial relationships with each other and with other marginalized groups and white allies within and outside Unitarian Universalism. So Blue honors Unitarian Universalist faith by using the 7 principles that all of our congregations ascribe to, but in addition, they've created their own version of 7 principles, and that occurred when they were founded after the shooting in Missouri that led to the Black Lives Matter movement. And they gathered with 1,200 people in Cleveland. There were 12 UUs there who found each other and created 7 principles for themselves going forward. And out of that came Blue with 3 goals: expanding the power and capacity of Black UUs within our faith, providing support, information, and resources for Black Unitarian Universalists, and justice making and liberation through our faith. Membership in Blue is offered to Black people and people of African descent, but they welcome Black people from any faith or no faith at all as well. They have an online service each month, and they're working to create 9 active gathering places and communities around the nation that they call havens. They're one example of how to create a variety of gathering spaces that are Black-centered and locally run. They also have a project called the Northside Housing Cooperative Initiative in Minneapolis, where they're planning to transform some vacant lots into affordable multifamily housing units. And they believe that investing in the material well-being of Black folks has an immediate and long-term impact on a whole area that's gentrifying. They point out that any waning commitment to racial justice limits opportunities for Black folks to thrive and find home and purpose in our spiritual community as Unitarian Universalists. This is one of the reasons for working outside of our organization as well as inside of it. They've been a catalyst for change and a firm bedrock of accountability in our association, a group for us to talk to and ask how we're doing. Most notably, they've been strong backers of the 8th Principle Project, which we've been talking about here. For those of you who've just walked and to visit us for the first time, this is a proposal that the whole denomination adopt this language. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. I'm going to be saying more about that later, as Ashley noted in her introduction. Meanwhile, we invite you to be as generous as you feel you're able to be during this offering through donating online or via check mailed this week to our office if you want to let the offering plate pass this morning. Thank you. I invite you to join in receiving the offering with singing the words, from you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live, as the ushers bring the offering forward. Thank you. I have 4 milestones to share with you this morning. The first is from Ashley. In addition to preparing the introduction to Blue, she shared with me that she was appointed to the Planned Parenthood United Executive Union, the head of the governing body of her union board, and so she was pleased with that. And she has a new puppy named Wendy, which is her mother's name. And she says, I know, but I love this puppy and I love my mom. The other end of dog life, and this announcement from Chris Murphy, her dog Tony went in for an operation where they found he was a lot sicker than Chris had hoped, and they ended up not waking him up this week. Those of you who know Chris know that in the last 11 years, Tony has been a really important part of her life as she lost her husband, Jim, in 2015, and She told me, I think of two words when I think of Tony: constant companion and unconditional love. He's been my rock. And I've been blessed to get to know Tony because we live near Chris, and I'm sort of a backup to the backup when we were playing with Tony and Chris isn't around. So I'll miss Tony too, Chris. And we have a lot of dog owners in the congregation, so you have a lot of people who know what you're going through, and we're there with you. Another death of a very different sort. This is a note from Rebecca Burton, who's a new congregant who can't be here with us today because she's down in Connecticut for the funeral of the husband of one of her dearest friends. And you may have read about this man, Quentin Williams. He's a legislator. He was at an inauguration party for his third term, and on the way home, he was killed in a head-on crash by a woman driving the wrong way on the highway. They were both killed. And Rebecca sent this note about Quentin Williams. My sweet friend Carissa lost the love of her life when her husband Q was killed in a wrong-way accident last weekend. Q sometimes seemed larger than life, and though I only met him once, I felt like I knew him through Carissa. He was a politician for the people and was beloved in his community of Middletown, Connecticut, and in the legislature. He leaves behind a tremendous legacy of lawmaking and mentoring that helped meaningfully elevate women and the disenfranchised and oppressed of his community. I suggest that you Google Quentin Williams to learn more about his work. Today, especially, I ask that you hold his wife, Carissa, in your heart. She is brave and strong, but this is almost too much to bear. She loved this man with her whole young heart and never dreamed she would lose him this way. Please hold Carissa and Q's mother, Queen, in your hearts today. I have no doubt the love you send will in some way, in some small way, help with their grief and healing. Thank you. And Carissa said she was going to send a clip of this part of the service. Rebecca said she was going to send to Carissa a clip of this part of the service to show that we were marking Quentin's passing. He was a very handsome young black man who was really making his mark in the legislature. And he will be missed over the whole country because of the ripples that he would have cast had he been able to continue his life. When you read about him, a very impressive man. So, Rebecca, if you're watching today or later, our hearts go out to you and Carissa. And one more sharing that's also related to death, but in an extremely different kind of way. Lori Borden asked me to let you know that Margot, her mom, is peacefully at the end stages of hospice. And Lori says you can send messages that she will read to Margot. You can send them via email to margotborden2021@gmail.com, or you can send them to Lori, loriborden2015@gmail.com. And Lori said she welcomes emails of lightness, and she said of Margot, she is strong in her mind while weak in her time. So Margot can still appreciate these messages. I've been in frequent touch with Lori over the last couple weeks, and it sounds like Margot is going towards this in her very positive Margot way. Those of you who can still see her sitting right over there where she always sat will know what I mean. And so I don't know if Lori is able to be with us this morning, but we're definitely with them as Margot completes her very, very long journey through life in the way that she would feel happy about. We always have unspoken joys and concerns and milestones, and in this congregation we leave time for silent meditation or prayer so that we're sure we're in touch with them. I invite you to enter that space now.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired. I am weak. I am worn through the storm, through the night, Lord, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. Well, when my life, oh Lord, is almost gone, and the day is past and gone. Yeah, hear my cry. Yeah, my call. Lead me on, lest I fall. Take my hand, oh, precious Lord, and lead your child on home. Well, well, well.
Thank you, Francois. An impossible act to follow. Our readings this week are both excerpted from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1966 address to the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. The first one is from his introductory remarks. And he said, "There are those wonderful moments in life when you speak before a group that is so near and dear to you that you don't feel you have to engage in the art of persuasion. You don't feel like you are in the midst of strangers. You know that you are with friends. I can assure you that I feel that way tonight. And then the second excerpt comes from the heart of his speech, where King is addressing myths the church needs to combat in its social action work. He has just addressed the myth that legislation is meaningless because the impulse to oppression lies in people's hearts, which can't be governed. Then he introduces a second myth for us to actively resist. A second myth that we must deal with is that of exaggerated progress. Certainly, we have made progress in race relations, and I think we can all glory that things are better today than they were 10 years ago or even 3 years ago. We should be proud of the steps we've made to rid our nation of this great evil of racial segregation and discrimination. On the other hand, we must realize the plant of freedom is only a bud and not yet a flower.
They say that 80% of the minister's job is to remind people of things that they already know. So this is the reminder part. These are revolutionary times. It's good to stop and claim that truth now and then. It's potentially true within the UU world for those of you who's been paying attention to this discussion about changing our bylaws and what that will mean to us, but it's certainly true in the bigger world. Ours is a time when our relationship to the planet and all the other beings on it is in upheaval. It's a mess in the air, which we've been polluting and thereby destabilizing and warming for the past few centuries. It's a mess in the water. We've been polluting and rerouting and extracting from deep aquifers at unsustainable rates. It's a mess in the soil. We've been depleting of natural nutrients and covering with concrete in the mistaken belief that we own it rather than, in the long run, are part of it. Socially, ours is a time when we're getting wiser about how the horrible evils of racism and classism persist and adapt and continue to bedevil us, even as we seem to make progress. About the dangers of us versus them thinking, of mob psychology and greed. We keep learning new things about how these things work and how to fight back against them. Meanwhile, science is busy mapping the growing evidence that at the genetic level, we are literally all members of one extended family. And we're trying to figure out what to do with that. In revolutionary times, two futures unfold. Those things that we're accustomed to, even the ones we cherish, get swept away and destroyed, or they get transformed by exposure to innovations and new circumstances. If we're courageous, if we're loyal to our UU values, and if we're fortunate, what we cherish gets transformed into something that is life-sustaining and love-giving, perhaps even more so than we imagined possible. And we also come to cherish some things that we never appreciated before. As a UU congregation, we affirm that all times are revolutionary in their own way. And we affirm that we are a community that aspires to make sure that our revolutionary times bend towards justice, compassion, and beauty. So that's the part I'm reminding you of. And this makes it appropriate as we look back today, this is the actual birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we look back to that 1966 address to the UU General Assembly, in which his main theme was a warning about the dangers of sleeping through a revolution. Now, after greeting us in that wonderfully friendly way that Becky just shared with you, King went on to refer to Washington Irving's story about Rip Van Winkle. I don't know how many people still learn that story in school today. It was at one time popular, but I think it's kind of fallen out of the curriculum. So I'm just going to remind us what happens in that story. Rip drinks himself to sleep in magical circumstances, and when he goes to sleep, he's a citizen of the English colony of New York, and he wakes up 20 years later to find himself the citizen of a new nation. His slumber has stripped him of his old friendships. It's left him dependent on the children that grew up while he wasn't there. And he's something of a permanent outsider in his town now, having contributed nothing to the creation of the new world. Now, King didn't spend a lot of time on this story in his speech to our General Assembly. The story isn't really all that critical of Rip, who was not an admirable person, nor was he a hateful person. He's just a henpecked, pleasure-seeking, friendly guy with a real aversion to work. When he wakes up, he's shocked by the changes, but he isn't devastated. The wife who plagued him has died. The kids are happy to have him back. The children of the village are entertained by his stories. He's missed a lot, but the opportunity to make his life serve a higher purpose than being personally happy was never really something that he aspired to. So he's not deeply suffering by these circumstances. But Dr. King took it for granted when he was talking to our convention that he had a different audience, an audience with loftier goals and desires, an audience that shared his values and didn't want to sleep through the revolutions of the day. So 1966 is a long time ago, and as I thought about today and the fact that we would be marking Martin Luther King Jr.'s 84th birthday were he alive, it's worth wondering whether a 37-year-old internationally famous human rights and nonviolence espousing radical Christian would feel at home at this year's UU General Assembly in Pittsburgh. Would he or she feel they were among friends? King wasn't just being polite. He had some real connections with the Unitarians of his day. The Unitarian president who introduced him, Dana Greeley, had been his teacher when he was a student at Boston University. He knew that Unitarians were among the white people who had answered his call to come to Selma, and that two of them, Reverend James Reeb and a Detroit housewife named Viola Liuso, had been murdered for answering that call. He and Coretta King, when they were courting, had attended Unitarian churches in Boston. He had had some exposure. I'm happy to say I think today's Martin Luther King would still feel among friends at General Assembly. He would be pleased that when we gather in Pittsburgh, we're going to be electing, unless something very, very strange happens, Sophia Bentoncourt to be our second Black UUA president. He would be pleased that several key Unitarian Universalist organizations, like the Church of the Larger Fellowship, are now Black-led. He would be pleased that our publication of, well, I have it over here, readings by the Black Lives of UU is widely circulated in the congregation and widely used by our congregations in readings. He would be pleased that our former president, the first Black president of the UU, Bill Sinkford, recently got called to be the minister at All Souls in Washington, one of our flagship congregations. He'd even be pleased that Beacon Press, our publishing house, is still publishing his writings as it was back in his time. Most of all, I think he would be pleased that we are still wrestling with that second myth that he warned us about in the Ware lecture, that myth of exaggerated progress. It's even truer, I think, than it was in 1966, that we have made progress in race relations, and we should be proud of it. But on the other hand, the plant of freedom is only a bud and not yet a flower. And I think King would get up there and acknowledge to his deep sorrow it hadn't made as much progress as he hoped. The backlash to our progress could not have surprised someone like King, who had obviously been directly exposed personally to systemic racism throughout his life. And I'm not even expecting that he would be surprised that we've got an extreme level of polarization in our society today, a lot of which is racism disguised as other issues. I think Dr. King's great soul would be heartsick at that. And he would know that we are too. To be honest, he would also know how much protectors of white privilege are arguing that the tables have turned to the point where white folks cannot help but think that they're being discriminated against and that the things being asked of them aren't always reasonable or fair. King would know that because of implicit bias, white people cannot help but harbor some of these thoughts, even if they don't subscribe to them, subconsciously, if nothing else. And he would try to comfort us by illuminating a way forward. He wouldn't just sit there with this pain. He would, because he was a prophetic voice, be illuminating a way forward. A lot of it would be likening what we are trying to do today to the path the progressives were already on in 1964. And a big part of it would be still being wary of that numbing effect of exaggerated process. And more than ever, as we said in the part we talked about in the call to worship, and as he did in the latter half of that Ware lecture in 1966, he would tell us there are things we need to be maladjusted to. Now, that phrase that he liked to use over and over in speeches at that time was common in the psychiatric jargon of the 1960s. It named the inability of some people to fit into school or some other institution as a disability. They were maladjusted. But King was saying that when it comes to fighting oppression, maladjustment to the world as it is healthy. It's not a disability. Maladjustment leads to commitment to a struggle for justice. And I think King would be especially pleased with the story of the proposed Eighth Amendment, to our principles, that's being advanced in UU world as evidence of our commitment to the struggle. He would have loved that the wording was the product of Black people writing within Unitarian Universalism, supported by white allies and others who agreed that the time had come for us to accept more leadership from those who had been most marginalized among us. He would have agreed that it's not enough for us to measure our progress by how welcome he felt among us. What our own Black members are telling us about what we should do is more important if we are serious about reshaping ourselves personally and Unitarian Universalism to have more and healthier impact in the wider world. Now, King was a wonderful orator, and he was a serious wordsmith. He would have understood how the wording of the eighth principle would have horrified UUs who love the generality and the shorter wording of our current 7 principles and our 6 sources of inspiration. I can see him sitting there listening to someone reading the eighth principle, calling for us to be journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institution. I could see him smiling and thinking, well, if that's supposed to be a soaring sermon, it won't fly. But the eighth principle isn't supposed to soar. It's not supposed to grab your heart. It's supposed to grab your attention. It's supposed to do a lot of things to get our racial justice work in shape to fight in the revolution, to not sleep through the revolution. And I'm proud that we would have a good story to tell about what he here in this congregation are doing to explore whether to adapt it for ourselves right now, as more than 230 congregations have already done, without waiting to see what the General Assembly does with it somewhere down the line. King would have loved the conversation we had after our service last week here, our congregational conversation where 26 people attended. And he would have loved all the ways that we began talking about that word accountably. He would have said, amen, when Carrie Duquette Hoffman, whom we're blessed to have lined up as our successor to Doug Richards as president of the board, said that when she heard the word accountability, it automatically got her thinking about how and when she had to report to somebody on progress. Unlike the other 7 principles, this one takes the time to state, we are publicly reporting on progress, and we are taking that seriously. Now, why would we start sticking all that kind of accountability language in a principle when we don't have it in any of the others? It's a little bit like prayer. When you start talking about accountability, you start with thinking about what's on your heart. What are you responsible for in this situation you're dealing with? And that's essentially what a good prayer is. It's starting with what's on your heart. King would have noted in our discussion that we were thinking about that, all the different kinds of accountability. What could that one word mean, since it isn't spelled out? And he also would have noted how he handled the term beloved community in there. Those are the 2 words that he made famous. He didn't invent them, but he made them famous. And the 8th principle makes them central to what we're striving to do when it shifts from how we are moving forward. We're being accountable in community by dismantling racism. When we shift to talking about what the goal is, it shifts to building beloved community. One of the reasons that principle goes on for so long. Now, in our discussion after church, we sort of accepted that without any struggle about what it means. And I think that that goes to the heart of the work that we still have to do. Now, I got carried away writing this sermon, I have to admit. I had a long section in here about some important theological work that I think needs to be done. UUs are often uncomfortable talking about what they believe is behind everything that they're doing. And it's important to note that a radical Christian like Dr. King knew exactly why he was doing what he was doing it. He was doing it for his understanding of God. I don't have that understanding of God. Most people in this room do not have a deeply Christian understanding of God. But we need to recognize that that leaves us a little bit defenseless to some of the situations that King encountered in his life. So when we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King, one of the things we should do is say part of our work is to go back and reflect a little bit more on whose are we? What is it that's going to keep us going in this struggle when it gets tough? And I had a lot in that original sermon about how King was on the same line of thinking as Theodore Parker, the 19th century Unitarian minister from whom he took the phrase, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And Parker's 2-hour sermon on the transient and the permanent in Christianity, which I was going to quote from, but that will all stay for another day. What I was going to get to with all of that is beloved community is implicit in what Parker was talking about. And this is one of the reasons King felt he was among friends. Even though he knew there were a lot of non-Christians in his audience, even in 1966, he knew that what compelled Parker to do his abolitionist work before the Civil War was the same thing that was pulling him on, a sense of something beyond ourselves that made it important to work towards something that was beyond ourselves. And beloved community, whatever it is, I think points in that direction. Beloved community, I'll start to define for you this way. It's a sense of community that orbits around the nature of the many guises of love. And as a result, a sense of belonging to community in which we all have constant opportunities to love and to feel ourselves beloved. I think that is the impact in the room of people who are in beloved community. So this is an aspect of the 8th principle I think we need to do some more work on in our discussion. And I'm going to leave you with some words from Erica Barron, who was one of the first ministers I met when you called me here in 2012. Erica was the minister in Rutland at the time. She later moved to the Catskills congregation and now works for the New England region. And in 2017, in talking to her congregants in the Catskills, Erica said this: I think it's curious that among Unitarian Universalists who so pride ourselves on being a place for people of diverse beliefs, we actually have so few deep conversations about those differences. My father, who has been a Unitarian Universalist for decades, has observed that UUs agree to disagree, and then we never do. In other words, though we agree in principle that there will be a variety of beliefs among us, we rarely actually explore those different beliefs, often preferring to keep our conversations to the places where we assume, rightly or wrongly, that there is actually universal common ground. So I say, let's move through this revolution of thinking about beloved community, at least in part, as a place where we can actually explore and cherish the different beliefs that we are grounded in. If we do so with love as our guiding light, we will surely find ourselves on solid common ground. And I suspect we'll find Dr. King's presence and his confidence in God feeling very close at hand, even if we don't use those words. Blessed be, and amen. So, we sang Precious, we had Francois sing Precious Lord because that was Dr. King's favorite hymn. The song most widely associated with him, however, has come to be We Shall Overcome, and Ronnie's going to tell us a little bit about how we're going to sing that.
Just a quick note about what we're doing with this. Apologies in advance for any chaos that might ensue. So the choir is singing a special arrangement of it. It changes keys a few times. You'll figure it out. Just follow along. The one thing I wanted to say is that if you're following along in your hymnal, the verses won't be in order. It's actually 1, 4, and then 2. We shall overcome, we shall live in peace, and we'll walk hand in hand. And it's probably not going to be in order on the screen either. Just sing something.
So one way to think about how you're going to be living this week as you go forth is just do what you would do in order for Martin Luther King to feel like he was among friends if he was around you. I don't think you go too wrong if you do that.